Zombie shark. It had to happen sooner or later, didn't it? We've had zombies versus sharks, we've had zombies riding sharks, and we have actually had zombie sharks but in video games. But now finally it's here, a shark movie where a shark is a zombie. So this is a made-for-TV sci-fi original film, and it's an interesting film. It's a kind of a spiritual successor to Ghost Shark, I would say, which I'm going to reference again in just a little bit. And it's an interesting film in the fact that this actually exceeded my expectations in areas where I thought it would fall flat, but kind of was disappointing with areas I thought this would have a slam dunk. So let's discuss. Let's tell you a little bit about the plot of Zombie Shark. So this focuses on four friends. They decide they want to get away from their busy working lives and have a little bit of a break in this island somewhere where there's this kind of little remote cabin, get away from it all. Unbeknownst to them, there is this government facility there that are doing some kind of experiments to try and repair kind of tissue and organs for soldiers when they're in the battlefield, and they're basically experimenting on sharks because according to this movie they're anatomically similar to humans. So basically, as you can probably guess, there is a large shark that is this kind of a zombie and a shark, and affectionately named Bruce, which is, in case you don't realise, is a Easter egg for Jaws there. And the interesting with this film, like a regular zombie, basically when as this shark bites mainly other sharks, they turn into zombies themselves. Although interestingly, Bruce actually has somewhat of a sentient being. He has more of a kind of intelligence than the rest of the sharks. And the other twist here is when the sharks bite humans, providing they don't completely eat them, they actually become zombies themselves. So you have two types of zombies within this film. And it's obviously up to our sort of dwindling group of survivors, these four kids and a few other kind of characters who we meet on the island, to try and, stop this menace from getting out. So let's discuss what's good and bad with Zombie Shark. So let's talk positives first of all. Like I said, this film exceeded my expectations in certain areas, and that was actually the characterization of this film, first of all. The actual characters themselves and the actors that portrayed them. Now, I'm not talking Oscar bait or anything like that. We are talking in the realm of TV sci-fi movies, but I thought they did a pretty good job here of making believable, likeable and relatable characters, which, to be honest with you, when you watch a lot of these kind of sci-fi movies, they just kind of look like, they're caricatures most of the time. They're just cliches and don't really seem like real people. With this film, I think that they do. So they did a good job here of making characters that you can root behind, basically, and because of that, it makes you that little bit more invested in the story. Now, the other thing I would say here is the actual script itself is a little bit more grounded than I expected it to be. With a title like Zombie Shark, you just thought this was going to be some kind of campy fun, like Ghost Shark, who I referenced earlier on. Now, with this film, I would say it basically tries to explain the science kind of behind it, and it has like a somewhat more of a grounded approach. It's not quite as outlandish as, say, Ghost Shark, which had like a really high amount of the kind of very outlandish scenes where you have this ghost shark exploding from someone's body and things like that. This film doesn't do that as much, so it makes it somewhat more grounded, but less fun at the same time. Whilst Ghost Shark, I think, was a lot more campy, and clearly was just a kind of a jokey film, but because of that, it was kind of fun at the same time. So it's a kind of a double-edged sword. So this one is a little bit more grounded. I'm talking in comparison here. This film is called Zombie Shark after all. But it kind of made for a little bit more of a compelling story. Let me put it like that. However, there are some negatives of this film, and this is the area where I felt this film would have had a slam dunk, and that is the sharks themselves are very disappointing in two ways. So first of all, the actual design themselves, they really just look like sharks, to be honest with you. There's nothing really zombified about them, which is the biggest disappointment to me. When you're watching a film called Zombie Shark, you want to see kind of decayed sharks and kind of ones that look like they're zombies. That's why you're kind of watching this. Very much like the Resident Evil game that I kind of mentioned earlier on. But here, they might have kind of whitish eyes, but that's pretty much it. That's really the only difference. There are a couple of scenes where we see some puppets, or one puppet in particular, which is essentially just a severed head of a shark. And that's, I guess, the only kind of real time where you see anything other than just what looks like a normal shark. But that kind of is only a minor sort of shark, if that makes sense. So it was disappointing and a bit of a missed opportunity. The other thing in regards to the sharks themselves is the effects here are extremely poor. So with a sci-fi TV movie, I don't expect big budget blockbuster effects. So let's keep our expectations in check there. However, in the realm of made for TV movies, I have seen some fairly good ones. This one, unfortunately, are a little bit on the crap side. They kind of just look very much like kind of cartoons, and the actual rendering is kind of quite poor. But the thing that bugged me the most is the actual way they're animated. They just seem kind of weightless, and there's a few shots, for example, where it's just, it takes you out because they're so kind of just clearly they haven't thought about the physics and stuff like that. For example, there's a bit where the group of islanders are basically trying to fend off these sharks by fighting them in the water. I mean, why would they get in the water anyway? But never mind. And they're kind of stabbing these sharks, but there's like probably less than a foot of water, and we see the fins sticking up. I think, how tall are these sharks? They've got to be about this high. It's stupid. But that's not the worst case. I mean, just the way the sharks move sometimes, they kind of just look like they're on rails almost, and things like that. There's one scene in particular that kind of really bothered me. Now, there's a minor character, the sheriff, basically, he gets killed earlier on, and we see his torso floating about in the lake or the river or whatever, and it's clearly just a shirt with some buoyancy, like some foam or something. It's completely weightless. And then we see these sharks from underneath, and these CGI sharks are basically tearing away at this body. But we see a shot sort of above the water, kind of looking down, and that's a practical shot. And it's just this, this kind of like this torso, just lazily kind of bobbing around. There's nothing sort of tearing it from underneath, and we don't see the kind of sharks in the water, things like that. So there's just the attention to detail and some of the kind of the effects here are really poor, and it just looks like they've kind of been brushed over basically, which is a shame because I think this is probably a better than average script and better than average characters and acting in this kind of movie than a lot of these films. So I think, to be honest with you, maybe some of the people behind the cameras here thought, well, it's just kind of this waste of time film. Don't worry too much about continuity or kind of physics or anything like that. Don't worry about it. People won't care, which is a shame because I thought if they had spent a little bit more time in it and put a little bit more thought in it, this could have been actually quite a memorable film. Maybe even to the level of Sharknado, who knows? So when it comes to all the, when it comes down to it, this really is pretty much an average. So I think it definitely has an audience, an interesting film. You don't get bored because I don't feel it's as typical as some of these films, and the characters make it quite likeable to watch. But it won't stick quickly. It's not something that you'll kind of remember and kind of think back to that classic movie, Zombie Shark. You won't be thinking that because, unfortunately, the scenes that we do see aren't particularly memorable and just kind of lackluster at best at the end of the day. So overall, I'm going to give this movie a 5 out of 10. An interesting film for different reasons than I thought, but not memorable in any way the slightest. So have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment, and I will look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.